Well, look, in his interview with the CBC's Adrian Arsenault, Prime Minister Mark Carney spoke about trade with the United States as his government prepares for important negotiations.
Okay, we need a good deal in the right time. And what we don't need is chasing a deal or chasing a small deal that disadvantages us for the bigger deal. We could sit down this afternoon and hammer the whole thing out over the course of the next 10 days if the U.S. side, which has other things to do, I acknowledge that, had the bandwidth and the inclination to go through it. We could hammer it all out. We know exactly what their issues. Yep. We know, you know, it takes two, but it takes two to negotiate it through, and they're not all the way there.
So in advance of those talks, the Prime Minister has formed an advisory committee on U.S. economic relations, and that committee met in person today for the first time. It's chaired by Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc and is expected to advise the government on how to manage trade talks with the United States. Dennis Darby is the president of the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters and was one of the advisors who attended that meeting today. Dennis Darby, good to see you again, sir. Thanks for coming in.
Nice to see you.
I'd like to start with your response to what the Prime Minister had to say there about not chasing a deal and giving up something in the small deal that compromises us for the larger one. What are your thoughts on what Mark Carney has to say?
Well, I think he's wise. I think, you know, we need to be looking the long game. Canada's relationship with the U.S. goes back, 150 years plus. You know, it's 75% of what we trade. It will continue to be that going forward. It'll be a large part of what we do. So the idea of, grabbing a deal right now, as tough as it may sound, we need to look at the long game. What happens to the manufacturing sector? What happens to the critical mineral section? What happens on defense? All these things need to be put together. So I think he's right. It's time to get to the table, and reacting to everything that gets said in the media by a U.S. official is probably not going to be helpful for Canada.
Are you surprised there isn't a deal by now? I know the political arguments are one thing around this, but as someone who represents people with real skin in the game, are you surprised there's not a deal yet?
Well, well, think about the process. I mean, July 1st has been set as the date, but that's really where the conversation has to begin. But we've been engaged with our members, with our counterparts in the U.S. and Mexico for over a year. I think it takes time whenever you have a trade deal, so I'm not surprised. I think the U.S. has not yet decided it's ready to have that discussion. I think its approach of talking to Canada and Mexico separately is not necessarily a bad thing, because the U.S. has beefs or issues with Mexico that aren't the same as they have with us. For Canada, we're in our best position to take advantage of our strengths. Energy, fertilizers, critical minerals, and one of the things that people don't talk about, or the U.S. doesn't talk about, is the manufacturing sector actually relies on Canada. They rely on Mexico as well, but the U.S. manufacturing sector, the reason we've been so successful and the U.S. has been so successful is because the U.S. needs the things we produce. Right. And so let's take advantage of that. Right now, everyone's in very tight. The government has been great to support companies who are getting affected by tariffs, but make no mistake about it, the U.S. industry is in tough, as is ours. Hopefully, the cooler heads will prevail.
Look, you can see the circular firing squad nature of tariffs, throughout the economic data here. But I wonder, when the Prime Minister sort of lays out how he views things publicly, privately, you're in that meeting today with all the other members of the Advisory Council. Does the way they're describing the situation in public, does that align with the broad view of all the key players from the key sectors who are part of this team?
Yes, I think everyone's there for the right reason. How to make sure that Canada thrives, and how to make sure we maintain access to our biggest customer. And yes, everyone talks about pivoting and finding opportunities around the world, and that just makes sense. But no, everyone's there. It has the exact, I think, to a person, let's be careful, let's do it carefully, let's get the deal in the best interest of Canada, and also make sure that the U.S. understands it's in their best interest to have that, to have a predictable trade deal with Canada. The data would back it up. Their economy is facing inflation. Manufacturers, especially the ones I know, are faced with higher input costs. Yep. Nobody in the U.S. Would be happy with that economic situation. What we need is to make sure that U.S. stakeholders start talking about it.
Right, but I wonder. I want to sort of look at the political rhetoric of this conversation with how the people who employ people and run businesses feel. Like, is it a failure that there is no deal here yet, or is it right to hold out, as the Prime Minister had said in his interview with Adrian today, that we could have had a deal. Give a bunch of stuff away, you get a deal really fast, but it's better to be disciplined and patient. I mean, what's the view of the business sector in your view?
So the business sector may have a slightly different point of view. From a manufacturing and exporting sector, we're in very tough, especially in those companies and industries that are affected by the 232 tariffs. So yes, some manufacturers said to me, Dennis, we need a deal. Yes, we do. But also on the other side, we have to make sure that we don't give away too much for the future. Someone said to me, eventually, the U.S. administration will change. The next administration might not have the same point of view.
It could be worse, though. I mean, there is a trend in American politics right now that is not comforting, right?
Right, but when it starts to affect voters, when it starts to affect consumers, when it starts to affect businesses in the U.S., and we think the longer the tariffs go on, the more those industries will be affected. So, yes, a fast deal, but I think the right deal for Canada is important, and making sure that we are taking advantage of all the things that we can provide to the U.S. Again, we can't talk about it as what's good for Canada. When you talk about it publicly, David, you have to talk about what's good for the U.S. And what the U.S. needs is a predictable supply of ingredients, parts, minerals, manufactured goods that help them propel their economy. So I think that's what the discussion has to be. And when the U.S. is ready to sit down, I know Canada's ready.
Look, I know you can't reveal all the secrets of the meeting today, and it's interesting that this is the Prime Minister wasn't at this, right? It is chaired by Dominic LeBlanc, who is the Canada-U.S. Minister. What is the upshot, would you say, of the consensus there, of the message to the government there, and what's your comfort level with where they are strategically? Because I know they don't reveal a lot of it publicly. How do you do that without showing your belly to the United States?
That's the issue. If you react to everything that the U.S. administration says, which often come out of left field, then you start to give away some of your ability to negotiate. So I think the industry understands that we have to do that. We understand we're in tough. We understand that the government's going to have to continue to provide supports. Right. But nobody, that I would say, without revealing individuals, everyone says getting a deal that works long term for Canada or that provides as much predictability as we can expect is the only way to go, because our economy depends on it. Our economy depends so much on trade with the U.S.
How optimistic are you, though, that you can get predictability with these guys? Because this is a deal the president negotiated, signed, and praised in his first term, and now calls it a terrible deal in his second term. Like, it is shifting sand constantly.
Yes, and that's a comment that came up over and over. That unpredictability, the lack of any kind of, is the tariff going to be A, B, or C, is affecting investment, but it's affecting investment in both countries. So I think you're right. I mean, right now we're living in a world where we don't know whether they're going, one of the parties, the U.S. would want to walk away. We don't know what the U.S. really wants until they get to the table. And I think Canada's doing the right thing. The discussions I know are going on. That I've spoken to the chief trade negotiator. They are talking to their American counterparts, but we're not at that formal state yet.
But is it, as a final point, Dennis Darby, is it preserve CUSMA as best you can at all costs and mitigate the damage on the sectorals as best you can? Is that sort of what the country should be bracing for?
I don't know where they're going to end up, but I'm telling you, the sectoral tariffs are hurting hundreds of thousands of workers in central Canada, and companies cannot persist long term. I mean, yes, the supports are great. So I'm not saying at any expense. I mean, right now those tariffs are outside of CUSMA. So even CUSMA right now they're not adhering to, because these are all contravene CUSMA. I think long term we're going to have to look at all of these things, and I think what we're doing in Canada right now, which is the commitment to build, the commitment to do more investment, that's one way to offset some of that loss of trade to the U.S. But it all takes time, and so I'm hopeful that the next time we speak, they'll be somewhere closer. But for now, you just got to strap yourself in.
Dennis Darby, President of Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. Always appreciate the time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.